Good day, and thank you for joining us for this EHS Partnerships presentation on COVID exposure control and communication. My name is Spencer Matthes, and I'm a senior industrial hygienist with EHSP in Calgary, and we're going to discuss everything and anything about returning your workplace to a healthy and functioning form. Before we dive into things today, I wanted to quickly introduce our Return to Healthy Workplaces Amidst COVID-19 speaker series. Over the next few weeks, we'll be posting a series of videos providing information on how businesses can plan and execute the safe return to work of employees during this pandemic. We have framed our discussions around the concept of integrated worker health. Essentially, integrated worker health is a shift in focus from the traditional practice of simply protecting employees from physical hazards to a more holistic approach. It considers all job-related factors that can affect work health, such as physical, mental, work, and real-life elements. For more information on integrated worker health as it applies to COVID-19, check out Glenn's video from last week. The link is posted in the description box. You can also visit our integrated worker health consulting page on the EHSP website. Again, see the link below. For my presentation, I'll be focusing on the physical aspect of integrated worker health and talk about how you can evaluate and control COVID-19 in the workplace and how to communicate the risks to your workforce. So with any hazard assessment, we first need to recognize and evaluate the hazard before we can implement controls. So in this case for COVID, there are a number of different hazards that present themselves based on the exposure to the person. So the source of it can change. We can pick it up from a surface that could have been sitting there for a number of hours, could have been a direct sneeze and an inhalation of the aerosols or anything such as that, which also plays into the mode of transmission. We've been seeing more and more usage of face masks and things like that just to kind of cover the mouth, cover the breathing, any incidental or accidental sneezes or coughs, while at the same time maintaining our social distance to cut down on that close contact. Trying to keep at least 2 meters apart and with face covering on has been the typical recommendation that's come from both provincial, federal, and other kind of health bodies. As well, we see more and more medical screening, not just from the COVID testing, but even just what we'll call quasi-medical screening at certain workplaces using digital thermometers and such to try and at least get some sort of gauging of a person before they enter the workplace, whether or not they may or may not have kind of the symptoms of COVID, the fever type symptoms. The other issue too, when it comes to recognizing and evaluating the COVID hazard is also its severity and its impact on people with pre-existing medical conditions. For instance, existing lung and respiratory conditions such as tuberculosis, chronic bronchitis, asthma. A person contracting COVID could have a much more serious response and be in much more distress, requiring hospitalization and further care. The other thing too is we've been talking more and more in the healthcare communities about asymptomatic people, so people who are not presenting symptoms. So the severity of the resulting illness, you may have COVID but not present any symptoms. Your severity is fairly low, whereas another person, especially one, like we said, with pre-existing medical conditions, could have a much more serious form of the illness, presenting in much more severity on the impact on their immune system and their bodily functions. So once we've recognized and evaluated the hazard that we're facing, we move on to controlling that hazard. And this diagram here of the hierarchy of controls should not be unfamiliar to very many people viewing this presentation. Of course, it's an inverted pyramid. What we're doing is we're starting from the top, which is the most stringent controls, which require the least amount of personal, we'll call it, input, whereas it filters down to the very peak, which is the bottom, which is where we require more personal input. That is, people actually have to actively participate in the correction and the protection against the exposure. So starting from the bottom of the pyramid, or the top, however which way you want to look at it, seeing as how it is inverted, we have elimination. This isn't the elimination of the hazard itself, that is the source, which of course is COVID. That would be nice, but elimination of the exposure to the hazard worked very well actually with the lockdown in regards to people staying put, avoiding the public areas, and working remotely, which has worked really well for a lot of people, actually surprising quite a few workplaces of how well it actually did work. Holding virtual meetings, virtual site walkthroughs, and training sessions. All the available technological platforms such as Skype, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Zoom have made it really easy to convey information amongst people without actually having to meet face to face. Now we're on to engineering controls, starting with ventilation. You probably noticed we skipped substitution. It's not really like you can substitute COVID for a different virus. However, engineering controls can provide us a whole bunch of different options that rely less on personal input and personal upkeep, aside from maintenance and such, but are more automatic. So in this case, using the HVAC system, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, to not only increase air rates throughout a work environment, but filter that air. Certain systems can have very effective filtration. Some are not designed for something such as HEPA, but can run a higher filtration kind of efficiency number type filter, such as MERV 13 up to 16. The other thing, though, too, is also to maintain cleaning so that it runs efficiently and moves as much air as possible. But also something else to look at would be some disinfection and chemical cleaning of them as well. People also like to put personal fans, especially in summer, on their desks, which is fine. The thing that they'd want to keep in mind is that they don't want the fan blowing from them onto other person around them. Not only is it not really courteous, but if there is a cough or a sneeze, it could easily just move and disperse those aerosols over to another individual. Another engineered control is looking at the equipment that people are using every day. One of the good things to look at would be automatic or differently actuated, in that not hand actuated with actual touching of the equipment for it to be operated, such as typically what we see now more and more in restaurants and in airports and other public places are sensor operated faucets and soap dispensers and hand dryers, using motion to activate them, or proximity sensors. So those types of things, or even using more foot actuated things such as, the simple garbage cans. The other thing, though, too, is if there are door handles, push buttons, or other things, especially other high touch point areas, is to look at using different metals with sort of, we'll call antiviral properties, such as copper. Copper is very effective at destroying viral pathogens on its surface. And this has been known since antiquity, basically stretching all the way back to at least 1600 BC with the Egyptians, who learned that drinking out of copper vessels, that people ended up having less diarrhea as a result of it. So there are really good properties of copper, even as they tarnish, that continue to be present, such as just a constant bombardment of ions towards the pathogen that lands on them. This is why stairwells at, say, Grand Central Station that are made of copper are still very effective at naturally disinfecting. The last group of engineering controls that can be looked at are simple barriers and isolating systems. Who hasn't been to the grocery store lately and seen sneeze guards in front of the cashier, like the lady in our photograph here on the slide? Or even just additional partitions and walls put up within workplaces to further segregate people. The average office now can be used as a nice isolated barrier segregation space for people that do have to be in the office and who can't work remotely, especially as workplaces start to open up. So as we move down the hierarchy, we start getting to the administrative controls. Now, we're now getting closer to where we need more personal buy-in from workers, because they have to adhere to these procedures and these documents and programs and plans we put in place to ensure exposure control. So one of the easiest ways to do this is with signage, and we've been seeing these ongoing through the whole COVID crisis. Floor stickers where we go with arrows pointing the direction you're supposed to go down aisles, or the distance to maintain that 2 meters between people in lineups where you have to place your feet. The notices for coughing and sneezing etiquette. Use the bend of your elbow to sneeze or cough into. Also, washing your hands too. These continue to be posted all around, and for a large part, they are effective. They're a good reminder. Also, too, people can get sign fatigue, and after a while, people are so used to seeing them, they start to lose their impact after a while. So as we move more into the realm of cleaning and disinfecting from the personal side, first, just going to take a look at cleaning versus disinfecting. So cleaning generally is removing debris and other surface issues, dirt, grime, whatever you want to call it, from objects and such. It will remove what we call germs, microbials, those types of things. It's not going to kill them unless there's a disinfectant in the cleaning solution. So disinfecting is actually using the chemicals to kill these microbes on the surfaces of the objects, but just simply putting a disinfectant on and wiping it off is pretty ineffective. You got to have the right cleaning process involved in this to actually have the amount of residency time for the disinfectant on the surface for it to actually do what it's designed to do. So you should always follow the manufacturer's recommendations on how to use their cleaner or disinfectant. So as we just touched upon there with the difference between cleaning and disinfecting is having the protocols and procedures in place to actually ensure that you're doing what you think you're doing by cleaning or disinfecting the surface. You typically have multiple procedures for hard surfaces versus soft surfaces and specific cleaners and actions to be taken with both. So specific chemicals with specific procedures have been developed for hard surfaces, tabletops, countertops, anything such as that, as well as soft surfaces such as clothing or fall protection PPE that's been used, stuff like that, that won't harm the integrity of the surface either, because its design has taken that into account, where it's not going to degrade the surface. Probably over a long period of time there could be some issues, but typically we're not going to let something sit on the surface for more than a couple of minutes, so it's not going to cause an adverse issue if the right product is applied to a compatible surface. So the other thing we want to look at is step up our cleaning of these high touch surfaces, both the frequency and the types of cleaners that we're using, to just ensure that we are cleaning effectively, using a proper disinfectant as well, or a combination product, to make sure that we're actually removing all the microbial life that is on it as well, including viruses such as COVID. So identify the high touch areas and ensure that the cleaning keeps up with how often those are used. And there is a ton of variety of products, so it can be a little bit daunting to find out which product you should be using for which surface. The best sources to go to find the best cleaning and disinfection products is to go to the Health Canada website. They have a extensive database for cleaning and disinfecting solutions that have been approved for cleaning up COVID. They also have a drug identification number, so it's easy to search. And this is called their list N. As well, the EPA in the US has a list N too. Very much the same as Health Canada, set up for COVID, but it's a little harder to go by a drug identification number, so you can search with a variety of different search field queries such as the name or product, manufacturer, those types of things. A couple options there that you can search through and find out the best product for your usage. So previously we've already kind of talked about physical distancing from one another using isolation and barriers and signage, but it is key to keep at least 2 meters apart from people, especially with the distance that a sneeze can go and the larger aerosols that can be produced. The other thing too to look at to make distancing from others easier is to look at the occupancy loading of the building, like who actually needs to be in the workplace at that time, who can work remotely, and who actually needs to be there for business continuity. Another way too, depending on the occupancy and you're maximizing the space to keep people apart, is the configuration of the workstations. Some of these might have to be completely rethought. You might have to look at the way cubicles are set up and offices are set up and split things out just a little bit more to increase the space between people. Keeping those staff levels to not only a manageable amount, but to the amount that's actually needed to keep the business operating. Like I said, if people don't need to be there, there should be flexibility in the programs offered by the employer to allow people to work remotely, or if they are coming ill, as people will still continue to be, that they don't feel also that they're going to be punished for missing work. So looking at HR programs can alleviate some of that stress and mental anguish that person might have when they think that they need to be at work, but they can't, and they know that they shouldn't. The other thing too is look at staggered start times, break times, and end times for shifts especially. Because with a shift, you can stagger them, so you're not congregating people at certain times. So let's say the break time, everyone comes out off the floor at the same time, and you've got 50 people in the lunchroom all at once. By staggering the shifts a little bit, having, say, your morning shift have one group of 10 start at 7, have another group start at 7:30, and have another group start at 8. That'll give you some good movement in between for breaks so that people aren't overwhelming kitchen areas or washrooms. The key here is to keep staff and groups down to certain sections in low occupancy numbers. Lastly, we've come to the end of the hierarchy. PPE, the last line of defense, the barrier that a person wears to physically distance themselves or lessen their chance of exposure through having a barrier worn on them. So we've seen a lot with face masks and respirators. Any respirator should be NIOSH approved and fit tested to the wearer to ensure that it seals properly. This also includes taking care of any facial hair, because on a NIOSH approved respirator that requires a facial seal as opposed to a blast hood and a loose fitting PAPR, you got to have a good seal contact to ensure that you get that maximum protection factor. Currently, procedure masks and cloth masks and other face coverings have been encouraged for transmission control, but they don't seal like respirators. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You have, for protection factor, you're looking much less than any type of fitted respirator. Just to give a general idea, a cloth face mask that a typical person wears in the grocery store is probably given a protection factor of like 2 to 5, whereas a fitted N95 NIOSH approved respirator is somewhere in the 60 to 70, maybe the 80 range for protection factor, and then you start getting to elastomeric half masks with P100 screw-on filters, and you're up at the 100 mark, just to give you an idea of what type of protection levels you're actually getting from face covering or respirator you might be wearing. So a lot of people might be thinking that they're well protected wearing a face covering, and they are to an extent protecting people around them by capturing those aerosols as they speak or sneeze or cough or whatever while they're wearing it. It's not sealing, so they are bringing in what we'll call unfiltered air. The other thing too is donning and doffing of these articles, because they're worn so often. People might be starting to get careless about them, thinking that they're just protected because it's on their face, but touching the exterior of it can also have, of course, particles or viable virus on them. So proper donning and doffing techniques are required for any face covering or PPE that a person might be wearing. Also too, there's gloves for touching things like other pieces of PPE, like a surgical mask, procedure mask, or an N95 respirator. These are disposable. They're not really meant to be worn over and over again, especially to cleaners who are using nitrile gloves and the such. They will degrade over time. So it's always good to just dispose of what is initially designed to be disposable PPE when it's finished with, and look at more robust solutions if longevity is a concern. Well, we've talked about a great number of ways to evaluate and control this COVID hazard, but it's really no good unless you can't communicate it and get that to the workforce and the people who are directly involved in it, especially if you're dealing with the public. As we've seen over and over the months, guidance has been changing. So this is where we start getting into our designing our program to be flexible enough to be updated almost on the fly, but also communicating that message to the workforce to keep them up to date on what the current protocols are. So this is something that should be designed with a group. Like a good example would be like your joint health and safety committee, where you have representation from the workforce, supervision, the health and safety department, HR, management, so that everyone is kind of involved in designing these types of plans, programs, and controls to protect against exposure risk for workers, and also to find out how they want to best roll it out and keep people up to date on it. So hazard and risk communication is very crucial to keeping people on board, and also reminding them that this is something that needs to keep happening and be enforced as well. So this process is something that will be ongoing and will be checked and updated as the whole situation and what we'll call our new normal continues on. Well, it's been a little bit of a whirlwind run through this presentation in COVID, and probably in a month, a lot of this stuff might have changed. It might not have. Who knows? We'll find out. But as always, we're going to have questions. So if anyone has any questions after viewing this presentation or anything else, feel free to contact me. Once again, I'm an industrial hygienist, and we're always open to helping with all of your health and safety needs, be it COVID or not. And Yeah, we have a skilled team ready to assist you in any project or with any problem that you may have. So feel free to reach out to EHS Partnerships. Thank you very much.